What you have in the West is you have immigration with degeneracy, lax laws. You've got laws pretty much where people can steal from a store and they cannot be charged for anything based over a certain amount. You hear that in the state of California, what's going on with the increase in crime. And they're purposefully dropping laws and punishments against migrants because they're trying to sow seeds of disorder to pass policies while the general public is busy fighting. I think if you realize that the world is not a very morally sound place, you should have understood that based on what just happened with Israel and Palestine versus 2 years ago with Russia, Ukraine. And you can see the contradictions there between both situations on the narrative that was being pushed. Sorry, all my European friends out there that are up in a roar and you feel like you're being replaced and that you're not going to be seen. They are purposefully doing this, not only just in Hollywood and entertainment and films, where they're purposely manufacturing division to keep the general public fighting so they can pass policies, but they're also doing that from an immigration point of view. Because immigration works where there's a rule of law and there's good traditions, there's good moral values that an immigrant can come into and understand how things work. This is the reason why if you go into, say, Bali, for example, or Indonesia, you don't have any issues of anyone smuggling drugs or marijuana into that place. Hardly ever, because the rule of law is so strict. You are well aware in advance the type of punishments that could take place, and so you respect that country going into it. But when you go into a Western country that is full of sexual degeneracy and hedonism, and they're trying all these social experiments, there's no standard. And they know that there's no standard because it keeps the economy going for the very rich and wealthy to stay in power. The disrespect that Africa has had to endure throughout a lot of modern civilization is deplorable.
But like, how are Europeans supposed to act or react when Africans are pouring in from everywhere at the moment?
They should accept them.
They should just be like, oh, come, take our homes, take
They
our
should
jobs,
accept
take
Africans.
everything.
Because when you guys came in mass to Africa,
But that was so long ago. I
that
cannot even bring
was so
it in
long
now
ago.
anymore.
But your companies are still there looting Africa.
Perhaps.
Neo-colonialism.
Perhaps.
You are still there stealing our resources, using our resources to develop your countries, and you don't want us to come here. You are asking how should you guys react when we come here.
Example, how are we supposed to react?
Imagine a thief steals your television, your TV, and you go to his house to watch a soccer game. How should the thief react? Exactly. Just be quiet.
Imagine your neighbors throw a youth-theme party where one of the games was dividing your house and possessions up among the players. Oh, and you are not invited and it's not a game. Next day they come round to take your stuff and make themselves comfy in your living room and garden. And get your children to do the cleaning after a little beating for good measure. That's pretty much what happened at the Berlin Conference. Almost 140 years ago, Africa was divided into colonies carved up with a few pencils and rulers. These formalized the scramble for Africa. German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck was the brains behind this colonial tea party, inviting representatives of 13 European states. The United States of America and the Ottoman Empire to divvy up Africa, colonize its land, and steal its resources all at his residence in Berlin, a process that lasted over 4 months. Among the invitees were France, Germany, Great Britain, Portugal, who were the major players. Of course, in this historic reshaping of Africa, there were some significant absentees. The Africans themselves who were not represented at any level during the conference. The Berlin Conference led to a period of heightened colonial activity by the European powers. Their supposed mission was to bring civilization to Africa in the form of Christianity and trade. That, for example, was what Belgium's King Leopold promised for his new possession, the Congo. In reality, what happened was the plundering of resources and genocide. Before the Berlin Conference, large swathes of Africa were still untainted by European settler colonialism. But soon after, all the states that make up present-day Africa had been parceled out among the colonial powers, with the exception of Liberia and Ethiopia. Liberia had been formed by freed American slaves, while Ethiopia had managed to repel an Italian invasion. As such, they were the only two African nations to retain their sovereignty at the turn of the 20th century. The most influential European powers at the conference managed to secure the shares of the continent they wanted. To put all this in perspective, take a look at the map of Africa in 1880 and then take a look at what it had become by 1913. Great Britain affirmed its control over territories in the north, east, and south of the continent. As well as Nigeria and Ghana in the west, France exercised control over most of West Africa, including major parts of the Sahara Desert. Mozambique and Angola became a part of the Portuguese colonies. Meanwhile, Namibia and Tanzania came under German control. The way the continent was rejigged arguably set it up for later failures. The new geography may have settled the overlapping interest of European colonizers, but it did not account for ethnic grouping in Africa itself. New borders were drawn through the territories of every 10th ethnic group. Internal conflicts were also in many cases made possible through these new borders. For example, in pre-colonial Rwanda, the Hutu and Tutsi coexisted peacefully. It was colonial rule that laid the foundations down for the division that pitted these two ethnic groups against each other. That was at the heart of the 1994 genocide. Some historians called the Berlin Conference a crime against humanity. Some also pointed out that African leaders should have rejected these borders in the post-colonial era. One thing is certain, what happened in Berlin led to immeasurable pain and suffering. For many Africans, Europe's wealth and prosperity is built on the back of this inflicted misery. And so perhaps it's high time the ex-colonists held another Berlin Conference to decide how much they should each pay in reparations.
While the British, with the Arab Egyptians, began to invade the Sudan, the Italians began to invade Ethiopia, the French invade Morocco and Algeria, the Spanish invade Mauritania and what is now called Sahara. The French invade what is Senegal, Mali area, while the Portuguese invaded what is part of Guinea area, while the British invades, again, what is Nigeria and Ghana, and the German invades what is Gabon, Congo, and Angola, and Namibia, but the Portuguese controls Angola, so the Germans had to run down to Namibia. In the course of all of this, when the fighting was finished and the bloody wars had been fought, the Germans was left with the short end of the stick. Notwithstanding, they had called the conference in the first place to cut Africa up between the Europeans. But now Kaiser finds himself cut out of the deal by the turn of the century, the 1900s, and he said, look, unless you give me a better piece of the land, because they hadn't discovered uranium in Namibia yet, and he didn't realize the true value of the farmland in Tanzania to the economy of Europe yet. So stuck with Tanzania and Namibia, which is mostly a desert, the Germans hit the ceiling. And when the Germans couldn't get a better deal on the African mineral resources, Germany went to war to find those resources in Europe.
Let us not forget that after the First World War, it was the British and the French who sliced up the Middle East and North Africa with no respect or empathy for the indigenous people of those lands. Now this what we are talking about today. What we are talking about today is not a problem in Britain. It is a problem with the world. It is a problem of imperialism. It is a problem of a system which places importance and places priority on big business ahead of human life. Colonization is not finished. Flags have just been replaced by huge, big corporations. This is what we're dealing with. We have certain parts of the media, not all of the media, certain parts of the media which act with very right-wing interests. So it's within their interest to demonize and dehumanize Muslim people. When you dehumanize a person, you can justify any crime you carry out upon them because they are not human and they are not the same as you. So you'll notice what they'll point out is physical differences. This is what they will try and make you feel passionately about. But really, it's not the physical difference, it's not the ideology, and it's not the faith that they have a problem with. They'll try and point out to you the physical differences, but they couldn't care less. They couldn't care less how a nun dresses. They couldn't care less how a Jewish man dresses. So why is it Muslim?
Disrespect that Africa has had to endure throughout a lot of modern civilization is deplorable. And I'll tell you why, because Africa feeds the planet.
Africa has shaped our past. It is shaping the present. it will shape our future.
So that bloke was Blinken, Genocide Joe's favorite minion emissary, who recently visited Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Angola, and Cape Verde. Now, let me translate his diplomatic lingo. So in terms of the past, America's involvement in Africa includes coups, weaponized aid, mineral exploitation, bombing campaigns as part of its war on terror, and of course, slavery. Just ask Gaddafi, Lumumba, or Nasser. They'll tell you. In terms of its present, America's Silicon Valley wouldn't be much without the DRC's cobalt, for example, not to mention importing some of our greatest minds. The US is also worried about its positioning in the continent. It fears having to give up its $100 million base in Niger, as Niamey and fellow Sahelian states Burkina Faso and Mali adopt an anti-colonial posture, move closer to Russia, and downgrade relations with their Western-friendly neighbors. Which brings us to the future. The US wants to ensure that its brand of democracy prevails. That means keeping cooperative African leaders in post, containing Russia and China across the continent, and ensuring that all the resources Washington may need for its own domestic and global interests keep coming in. But I'm sure Blinken was really there to assist Africans fight terrorism and strengthen African democracies. You know,
Africa has built the world throughout the ages. Africa built Europe. Africa built America. Africa built Australia. Africa is building China. All the resources. You go to Europe today and you see the gold, the copper, the electricity, everything. It is from Africa. And that is why they came here and enslaved us. That is why they came here and took our mineral. That is why they are still coming here. Because Africa is the continent that has fed the world. When we talk about the mother continent, we are not simply talking about the mother continent to the extent that she feeds our own children, but she feeds the world.
And the world knows that.
And the world knows that. That's why she cannot be allowed to be free. And that is why she must wake up. And she can only wake up when her sons and daughters wake up. And we are not saying that when she wakes up, she's not going to feed the world. She will. But she will do so on her own terms and with dignity. But throughout history, Africans have been dehumanized, have been humiliated, and that is what we must stop. Interference in Africa started with slavery. When slavery had lost its value, it graduated into colonization. And that is the context in which Berlin must be seen. When the European powers sat in Berlin and divided the continent of Africa into spheres of influence. When colonization had lost its luster through a combination of certain realities and agitation from the continent, we regained our independence. But as John Henry Clark, that great African-American, said, we regained independence by mimicking European governance systems. And he rightly says, no African country will ever succeed on the basis of those systems. After that, the neo-colonial project was instituted. And all of us will remember Kwame Nkrumah's book, Neo-Colonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. And he there says the most dangerous. We are now in a neo-colonial stage when the European powers are at their most diabolical, when the Americans are at their most diabolical.
Parce que la France n'a pas le carburant. Parce que la France n'a pas le cacao. Parce que la France n'a pas l'uranium. Vous n'allez plus reconnaître cette France-là. Parce que la France dépend de l'Afrique et on ne respecte pas les Africains. Voilà le message que je voulais faire passer ici. Respectez les Africains que vous voyez. Ne rentrez pas dans ce jeu-là. Dans ce jeu-là où on vous dit qu'il y a trop d'immigrés. Ne rentrez pas dans ce jeu-là où on vous dit que le bouc émissaire c'est l'immigré.
The same people who have the audacity to tell us that we are poor countries. They are taking trillions out of Africa every year. And what is the African doing? Like an obedient, programmed black man, we just give in. And then one might say, why is it that African leaders haven't done anything about this deplorable situation? Well, let me tell you, my brothers and sisters, they have tried. Documented to this day, 22 coups where leaders were assassinated. The first 7, when they decided they were pulling out of the CFA and that they're going to print their own money, they were assassinated. Every time an African leader has tried to do what's best for their country, they were assassinated. Majority of them aided by France, who felt that when there was a natural resource discovered in one country, they wanted to create a coup. So while the country is thrown into a civil war, they're siphoning the natural resource.
Hey guys, if you want to watch more clips, click here.
And if you want to watch the full podcast, click right here.